Yo guys, this is Reinhardt, and this video is gonna be hashtag save Unholy because hey boy, the spec needs to be saving. And this video is gonna be about the design flaws and design problems of Unholy Decay. And I made a well-constructive post on the Blizzard official forums under Death Knight explaining exactly what is going on and why Unholy, in my opinion, is a extremely boring spec to play, an extremely excruciatingly boring spec to play. And B is, I don't think it's really that viable in PvP. And even though a lot of people say keep playing it, it will get better, it's not getting better, it's actually getting worse. And I will address it over here with a hashtag math actually included in all of it. So, movement, hashtag save Unholy. I'm gonna post that to Twitter, on Twitter to Holinka, Celestian, Zajrim, and pretty much every single developer out there. And I would love to you guys do the same thing. If you can, please help, because Spec needs to be helping and only we can actually make a difference as a players in terms of that. Maybe show the designers like, hey, there is some problems with Unholy design overall in general. So I'm gonna message on my Twitter, hashtag save Unholy, and link the post. If you can do the same thing, that would be appreciated, because together, if we collaborate on that, we might do something. Now let's talk about the design problem of Unholy in PvP itself. So first of all, I would like to address a few myths where people say Unholy is fine. The very first one is saying that Unholy scales better than Frost. Well, with the current changes with the buffing haste and the haste stacking for Frost Decay, that might be not the true. But even regardless, even though Unholy might scale better than Frost, it scales better in PvE, not in PvP itself. The reason why is because Multi-Strike itself procs twice in PvP and it procs Necrosis as well. And I will go into detail about that later down in this log. But basically, one of those things is we cannot compare PvE scaling and PvP scaling in one single thing, because there's a 50% crit rate, there's a multi-strike hitting for half as hard, and in PvP you have a 100% uptime on a boss, versus, well, mostly like maybe 80-90% uptime on a boss, versus in PvP where you have less than that, like maybe 30% or 40% tops uptime. Most likely you're probably gonna have a top time of 20% if you're fighting against a really high snare range teams like God Camp or something like that. So you cannot really compare those two beasts together in terms of scaling. The second myth is, well, look, there's some high-rated DKs out there. Well, there are some high-rated DKs out there. There's not many that are played Unholy to high ratings. Most of them, they'll log out as Unholy or something like that, but when you mouse over them, it actually shows Frost still that they play Frost DK. But regarding of that, like Maz is probably arguably one of the best Death Knights in North America. He himself said, I went 1 win, 6 losses as Unholy. Switch to the Frost spec, the same comp, I went 6 wins, 1 loss. So what does it say? It says that even the top rated DK say, you know what, let's stay away from actual Unholy and let's go Frost. And there are a few viable comps, like people say. One is Brewmaster DK, Unholy DK, and the second one is Unholy Shadowcleave. But both comps right now, it's just extremely boring to watch or to play, because the whole idea of those two comps is let's get to the dampening and then let's have our damage sink in and make sure the healer doesn't drink. That's the only thing that kind of makes those comps viable. But playing Unholy Brewmaster is like playing Boring Cliff or Double Healer Decay. It's extremely boring. It's not really that all interesting. Even Double Healer Decay in Mists of Pandaria was a lot more fun because Unholy at least could kill shit. So that's the second myth. The third myth is, look at me, I'm doing fine. Well, also playing with the best rated players and high rated player DK players like partners doesn't make Unholy DK viable. It just makes it the other two partners that are extremely good at the video game also carries the spec itself in general. Like, here's what my remember we invented the zombie chicken cliff back in Mists of Pandaria? I played with the same boomkin. We ran in Mists of Pandaria 5.1 patch when the Frost was still dominant. But Unholy could make plays. We got to 2300. It's before bloat and it was just for funsies. That's back when the basically locks were globaling people with the chaos waves. That was when Frost Bomb would take like 50% of your HP. We got to 2300 then, which was like surprisingly not bad at all. And my we played with the same boomkin this patch, and this is literally what he said. He said, back in the day, you could create plays and you could create pressure on your own. Now, I just don't see it. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, dude, I don't see it also. So that's... No. I don't think Unholy's... I think Unholy might be able to get to high ratings, but very, very few selected comps. You have to have an amazing, amazing best players. And even then, I don't think Unholy is viable in the top 50 spot. So, and I've talked to the multi-glad DKs, I talked to the rank 1 DKs, I talked to the Maz, I talked to like so many high-rated DKs, it's unbelievable. And like, I was thinking maybe I was doing something wrong, maybe there's different playstyle. No, all of them said like, just go Frost, make your life easier. And I don't want that. I play Unholy DK, I play WoW for Unholy DK. In fact, if there was Unholy DK out of World of Warcraft, I would probably played it. To be honest, I actually have more fun playing River in freaking Rift that doesn't have a rated PvP and not as balanced PvP than World of Warcraft. So anyway, now let's talk about why Unholy design is actually so bad. Well, mainly it's because there's stat as a multi-strike, and for Unholy, multi-strike is #1 stat. Why? Well, simply put, because it procs necrozes. Every time you do a multi-strike, you proc necroz for additional damage. Necrozes hits for 2k. Okay, that's good. Scourge Strike, let's say, Scourge Strike hits for 10k damage, 5k each, and one of them gets a multi-strike and procs necrozes. That means that necrozes literally do 40% of one portion of a Scourge Strike damage. Now the problem is, multi-strike procs twice in PvE and only once in PvP. If you look at Ally Shamans, Windwalker Monks, Unholy DKs, their all main primary stat in PvE is actually multi-strike, and they're all struggling in PvP. Well, at least I would say that Ally got 33% PvP damage buff to their Lava Burst, but Unholy didn't get any secret patchworks that make Unholy stronger in PvP because they have to make up for the huge loss in multi-strike that they get in PvE. Not only they didn't get anything to substitute that loss, they got Necrotic Strike taken away in Wilderness of Draenor. And back wholeheartedly, I don't think Necrotic Strike should be come back 100%, but there should be some sort of a melee pressure compromise itself. The problem is Unholy is still one of the most immobile specs in the game. It does more range damage as Frost, but when it comes to mobility, both of those are pretty hand to hand. They have the same ability. Like, this gets snared the same amount of times. The only difference is Frost has less range damage than Unholy has, but in return CC does less by 20% on Unholy. And Unholy has Pet to compromise when the Unholy getting kited. At least the Pet can help and leap and stun and do something in that regard. But regardless of that, Unholy is still immobile class, and when Unholy finally gap closes on something, it has like 4 globals, 4 melee strikes to do some damage, it does 10k Scourge Strikes. And multi-strike is so garbage in PvP that it's literally almost 10k damage. Now I know there's a multiple sources like diseases and pet, but max Unholy can do is what, like 75k damage in 5 globals? That's being too generous, by the way. It's not even 75. It's usually like down to 60k damage. The point is, the problem is, for Unholy it's more viable to do a basically Icy Touch dispels on a shitty rejuvenation than actually doing any damage, while Unholy stands in the melee range of a druid. That's basically how bad it is, and this is what Matt says. Like, this is not fun. I'm trading globals with the rest of the druid. I'm using global to Icy Touch and sacrifice some of my damage, and all he does in return is putting that rejuvenation back. Like, what is going on here? So, one is multi-strike. It severely gimps Unholy in PvP because it only procs once. The second thing that's really terrible is Soul Reaper got up to 45%. That dilutes the Unholy damage above 50% really quickly. If Unholy does 30k damage and it doesn't have a Soul Reaper, then the entire damage will be buffed by like 12-15%. If there's a Soul Reaper at 45% HP, the overall Unholy damage has to be lower. There's not infinite amount of DPS that Unholy can do where everything incorporates perfectly. No, there's always trade-off. If you have a strong execute, that means your above execute range do less damage. If on the other hand you execute it at 45%, then 46% and above, you do less damage. Well, with that design problem is that nobody, like in PvP, you can dispel Soul Reaper, you can kite heal Soul Reaper, you can top somebody off, and the Soul Reaper becomes practically useless. And with the damage of Unholy being so low, above 46% in PvP, it's really hard to hold the target below 45%. Yes, there's a few gimmicky things that you can actually do, like Breath of Sindragosa and Gargoyle in a decent burst, but the 4-set doesn't synergize that well. So that's the second problem. Third problem is a 2-set bonus. It's terrible. You grip, you do 25% more damage on Scourge Strike. You literally, what, do 2.5k more damage on the grip? If you grip twice in a minute, you do what, 5k extra damage in 1 minute? That's mathematically is terrible. Next thing. Wow, I'm not done yet. 40-second gargoyle duration should be less. It should be 20%, but hitting twice as hard. Because the fact is, again, everything is budgeted in terms of DPS. There's a limit, there's a bracket to how much DPS you can pull before you consider to be overpowered. There's no infinite DPS, meaning that if Gargoyle lasts 40 seconds, it will do a lot less damage than it would be lasting 30 seconds, or even if it lasted 20 seconds. So diluting Gargoyle, diluting Soul Reaper, and basically making multi-strike proc twice and proc Necrozes in PvE makes Unholy very viable and very strong spec in player versus environment. But when it comes to PvP, if we take all of those discrepancies, Unholy doesn't do a lot of damage, and that's the biggest problem. Not enough damage, my friends. That's why I think there has to be rework. Basically, after talking about it, people, replace 2-set bonus for Unholy to make Scourge Strike do a full shadow damage. Make those Scourge Strike hit for like 15-20k. So at least there would be some kind of a budget. There's something you can do. You do 5 strikes with Unholy, at least you can take out like 100k of somebody else's HP, versus you do 5 strikes and you do like 50k damage with Scourge Strikes. Like, this is really unbudgeted damage. It's really low melee damage by Unholy. Like, Unholy goes against any melee spec and it just does infinitely a lot less damage, except maybe Windwalker Monks, because guess what, Windwalker Monks also tied to a multi-strike in PvE, and that fucks the spec in PvP as well. So I made a suggestion, wrote everything step by step. We need to save Unholy. Hashtag save Unholy. A lot of Death Knights saying, I prefer playing Unholy. I love playing Unholy. I don't want to be forced to be playing Frost Decays. I don't want to be forced to playing anything else. I like my spec. And I do too, personally. I do videos about it. And I do want Unholy to come back and be viable again. Something has to be reworked. Full Shadow Scourge Strike or bring the Necrotic Strike back. There's a 2 design flaws with Unholy. Unholy either can be front-end damage or can be back-end damage. Front-end damage meaning Scourge Strikes do a good amount of damage and kill the target. Or a back-end damage where there's a Soul Reaper and there's Necrotics. But you cannot have 2 of inconsistent damage types on the same spec while gimping each other way around. Right now, Unholy has a back-end damage working against front-end damage by a lot with a 45% Soul Reaper. And to top it off, on top of it, we also have multi-strike with Necrozes that fucks Unholy in PvP. So post down below the link, the representation, the everything, all the data you need. Let's do something.